The golden sun beat down mercilessly on Polly Bennett's bent back as she struggled to pull another stubborn weed from between the rows of corn. At 6 months pregnant, the work that had once been simply tiring now bordered on torturous, but she had no choice. The Montana Territory farmland wouldn't tend itself, and with no husband or family to help, the responsibility fell squarely on her shoulders. Sweat trickled down her neck as she straightened, one hand instinctively cradling the swell of her belly while the other pressed against her aching lower back. Virginia City lay just over the hill, close enough to see the church steeple but far enough that Polly felt utterly alone on her small plot of land. "Madam, you ought not be doing that in your condition." The deep voice startled her, and she whirled around, nearly losing her balance. A tall man sat atop a dappled gray horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't from town, she would have remembered him, but there was something in his steady gaze that didn't trigger the fear she'd become accustomed to when encountering strangers. "I don't recall asking for your opinion, mister," Polly replied, brushing dirt from her apron. "And my condition doesn't change the fact that these fields need tending." A smile flickered across his sun-bronzed face as he dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Grant Patterson," he offered, removing his hat and revealing hair the color of chestnuts. "Just rode in from Colorado, looking for work, actually." Polly assessed him carefully. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots well-maintained, and the Colt revolver at his hip looked like it belonged there without seeming threatening. Most importantly, his eyes, a clear, honest blue, met hers directly, without sliding to her swollen belly with judgment. "There's nothing for you here," she said, turning back to her work. "I've got no money to hire help." "Wasn't asking for money, madam." He stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "Just a place to water my horse and maybe pitch my bedroll for the night. In exchange, I could lend a hand with whatever needs doing." Polly paused, weighing her options. The summer of 1872 had been hard, and the autumn promised little relief. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 5 months now, caught in a mining accident that had claimed 3 other men as well. The baby growing inside her would need a roof, food, and warmth when winter came, things she wasn't sure she could provide alone. "There's a pump by the barn," she conceded finally. "Your horse can drink his fill. As for work," she gestured to the sprawling field, "take your pick." "It all needs doing." Grant nodded, a small victory in his eyes. "I'll start by finishing these weeds. You should rest, Mrs. Bennett, Polly Bennett." She didn't move. "And I don't need your charity, Mr. Patterson." "It's not charity if I'm getting room and board," he countered smoothly. "And it's just Grant." Despite herself, Polly felt a smile tug at her lips. "The barn has a clean stall with fresh hay. It's not much, but it's dry." "I've slept in worse places," he assured her, already rolling up his sleeves. As Polly reluctantly retreated to the small, dilapidated cabin that served as her home, she couldn't help glancing back at the stranger now methodically working his way down the rows she'd struggled with all morning. There was something in the way he moved, confident but not cocky, strong but careful, that reminded her of Thomas. But where Thomas had been slight and quick, this man was solid, built like the mountains themselves. She dismissed the thought immediately. The last thing she needed was to start comparing every man to her dead husband. Or worse, to start thinking any man would want a pregnant widow with no prospects and a crumbling farm. But as the afternoon wore on, and she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, she couldn't help peeking out the window at the cowboy, who had made more progress in a few hours than she had in days. When she called him in to eat, the grateful smile he gave her stirred something inside that she thought had died alongside Thomas. "Your land's good," Grant commented between bites, Rich soil. With the right care, you could grow just about anything here. It was my husband's dream, Polly replied softly. We came out from Pennsylvania 3 years ago. Thomas worked the silver mines in the winter and our land in the summer. Grant's eyes moved to the crude wooden cross visible on a small rise beyond the cabin. He didn't ask, but Polly found herself continuing anyway. Cave in. 5 months back. Her hand drifted to her belly. He never knew about the baby. Grant nodded solemnly. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Bennett. Just Polly, she corrected him, surprising herself. If you're going to stay and work, we might as well dispense with formalities. That night, as Polly lay in her narrow bed listening to the night sounds of the Montana wilderness, she found herself wondering about the man sleeping in her barn. He hadn't asked questions about her past or her future, hadn't commented on how inappropriate it was for a woman in her condition to be alone, hadn't made any of the suggestions the townsfolk had been so free with that she should sell the land, return east to family, or consider the marriage proposals from men old enough to be her father. Instead, he had simply helped, and for the first time since the mine foreman had come knocking with the news that had shattered her world, Polly slept without dreaming of how she would survive the coming months alone. Morning came with the crowing of her lone rooster. Polly dressed quickly, expecting to find that her mysterious helper had moved on during the night. Instead, she opened her door to the smell of coffee brewing over a small fire, and the sight of Grant feeding her few chickens with grain from the nearly empty bin. Hope you don't mind, he said, noticing her surprised expression. Figured you could use a hot cup before starting the day. Thank you, she managed, accepting the tin mug he offered. The coffee was strong and sweet, better than she'd made herself in weeks. You're still here. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Still plenty of work to do if you'll have me. Polly studied him over the rim of her mug. Why would a man like you want to help a stranger for nothing but a barn to sleep in? Grant considered her question, seeming to weigh his words carefully. My pa always said a man is measured by what he does when nobody's watching and how he treats those who can't repay him. His gaze traveled over the farm, the leaning fence posts, the patched roof, the fields stretching toward the foothills. Besides, I've been drifting since the war ended. Gets lonely on the trail. The war, Polly couldn't help asking. You fought, a shadow crossed Grant's face. Union cavalry, 4 years that felt like 40. He shook his head slightly as if dispelling unwanted memories. But that's ancient history now. Polly nodded, understanding his reluctance to discuss it further. Many men had returned from the conflict changed, some broken in ways that weren't visible to the eye. Thomas had been lucky, too young to fight when the war began, and saved by a minor heart condition from the later drafts. Well, she said finally, if you're determined to stay, I won't turn away the help. But I should warn you the roof leaks something terrible when it rains. The well pump sticks in dry weather, and I'm fairly certain there's a family of raccoons living in the root cellar. Grant laughed, a rich sound that seemed to brighten the early morning air. Sounds like paradise compared to some places I've bedded down. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Grant would rise before dawn, tend to the animals, and have coffee waiting by the time Polly emerged. They would work separately throughout the morning, Grant in the fields or making repairs, Polly handling the household chores her condition still permitted. They would share a simple midday meal, then return to their tasks until supper, which they ate together at Polly's small table. Their conversations remained largely practical at first, discussions about which crops to prioritize, how to reinforce the chicken coop against predators, whether the old plow could survive another season. But gradually, Polly found herself sharing more about her life with Thomas, their journey west, their dreams for the farm. In turn, Grant spoke of his childhood in Ohio, his travels after the war, the skills he'd picked up working cattle drives and breaking horses. What he didn't speak of was why he'd never settled anywhere, never claimed land of his own under the Homestead Act like so many other veterans. Polly sensed there were chapters of his story he kept closed, just as she avoided mentioning her estranged family back east, who had disowned her for marrying Thomas against their wishes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Polly felt the baby kick particularly hard. Without thinking, she grabbed Grant's hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel that? Little one's practicing for a horse race, I think." Grant's expression of wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm made her heart flutter strangely. For a moment, his calloused fingers splayed protectively over her rounded stomach, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Then, seeming to realize the intimacy of the gesture, he gently withdrew his hand. "Strong," he commented, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Just like the mother. Polly blushed, suddenly aware of how inappropriate she'd been. "I'm sorry." "I shouldn't have. No need to apologize," Grant interrupted softly. "It's a miracle what you're doing, creating life." He looked out toward the darkening fields. "I've seen plenty of death. It's nice to be reminded of the other side of the coin." The simple honesty in his words touched something in Polly. Thomas had been excited about the prospect of children, but in an abstract way. They'd never had the chance to experience this together, these moments of connection with the growing life inside her. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. "What if I can't do this alone? What if something goes wrong?" Grant turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're not alone, Polly, not anymore." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Polly looked away first, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. "It's getting chilly," she said, struggling to stand. Her center of balance shifted more each day as the baby grew. Grant was on his feet instantly, offering his arm for support. She took it, feeling the solid strength of him, allowing herself to lean on him just for a moment before releasing his arm and stepping toward the door. "Thank you, Grant, for everything." He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture she'd come to find endearing. "Sleep well, Polly." That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Polly was awakened by a crash of thunder so powerful it seemed to shake the cabin's very foundation. Rain pounded against the roof, and within minutes, she could hear the telltale dripping of water finding its way through the many gaps in the ceiling. She lit a lamp and began positioning buckets and pans to catch the worst leaks, a familiar routine from previous storms. A knock at the door startled her. Grant stood there, soaked to the skin, water streaming from his hat brim. "Barn roof's worse than we thought," he explained, stepping inside at her gesture. "Half of it just came down," Polly gasped. "Your things got my bedroll and saddlebags out in time," he assured her, indicating the items he'd dropped on the porch. "But that horse of mine is giving me the most judgmental look I've ever seen on an animal." Despite the situation, Polly found herself laughing. "Bring him around to the lean-to on the south side. It's not much, but it should keep him dry." While Grant settled his horse, Polly added wood to the stove and put on water for tea. When he returned, she handed him a threadbare towel, one of only 3 she owned, and busied herself with the tea to give him privacy as he removed his sodden shirt and dried off. "You can take the bed," she offered, pointedly keeping her back turned. "I'll make up a pallet by the stove." "I'll not put a pregnant woman out of her bed," Grant countered firmly. "The floor suits me fine." They argued good-naturedly about the sleeping arrangements until compromising Polly would keep the bed. But Grant would sleep on a pallet beside it rather than near the stove. where leaks were already forming puddles on the floor. As they settled in for the night, the storm raging outside, Polly found herself oddly comforted by the presence of another person in the small cabin. She'd grown accustomed to loneliness, had wrapped it around herself like a familiar blanket, but now she realized how cold that blanket had been. "Grant," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. Came the drowsy reply from the floor beside her, the barn. "Can it be fixed?" There was a pause before he answered. "Not easily. The main support beams have rotted through, probably why it couldn't handle the weight of the rain." Polly sighed. Another problem she couldn't afford to solve. Another sign that perhaps she should give up, sell the land for whatever she could get, and try to start over somewhere else. As if reading her thoughts, Grant spoke again, his voice clearer now. "I've been thinking, Polly, this cabin. It's not fit for winter, especially not with a baby coming." "I know," she replied, her throat tight with unshed tears, "but I've nowhere else to go. What if—" Grant hesitated. "What if I built you a proper house? Something solid with a real foundation and a roof that doesn't leak like a sieve." Polly sat up, peering through the darkness at his shadowy form. "That's absurd. I can't pay for materials, let alone labor." "There's good timber on your north acres," he countered, "and I've built houses before. After the war, there was good money in it, helping folks rebuild what got destroyed." "Even so, why would you do that?" Polly demanded, her voice sharper than intended. "You hardly know me." Grant was quiet for so long that Polly thought he might have fallen asleep. Then softly, "Maybe I'd like to know you better. Maybe I see something worth staying for." Polly lay back down, her heart racing. "You shouldn't say such things. I'm in no position to—" "I'm not asking for anything, Polly," Grant interrupted gently. "Just offering to help build something that will keep you and your child safe through the winter. What happens after that? Well, that's for you to decide." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Neither of them mentioned their nighttime conversation as they surveyed the damage to the barn. Half the roof had indeed collapsed, crushing a workbench and several tools beneath it. "Lucky your horse wasn't standing there," Polly remarked, picking through the debris for anything salvageable. Grant nodded, examining the structure of what remained standing. "We could tear it all down, use the good lumber for the house, and build a smaller stable later." Polly raised an eyebrow. Grant met her gaze steadily. "Unless you've changed your mind about letting me help." Polly looked away, focusing on extracting a hammer from the wreckage. "I haven't, I just—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express her conflicted feelings. "You don't need to explain," Grant said, his voice kind. "I understand pride, Polly, and independence. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." She couldn't argue with that, especially when the alternative seemed increasingly impossible. Her body grew heavier each day, her movements more awkward. The baby was due before the first snow, which in Montana could come as early as October. That left precious little time to prepare. "All right," she agreed finally, "but I have conditions." Grant's lips twitched. "I'm listening." "I work alongside you as much as I'm able. I learn everything you're doing so I can maintain it myself later. And—" She took a deep breath. "I want a written agreement that the house and land remain mine, no matter what happens." If Grant was offended by her caution, he didn't show it. "Fair terms. Though I'd add one more: you promise to rest when your body tells you to, not just when you collapse from exhaustion." Polly grudgingly agreed, and with that, their project began. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grant rode into Virginia City to purchase nails, glass for windows, and tools they didn't have. Using money he insisted was just sitting in a bank in Denver doing nothing useful. They salvaged what they could from the barn, then dismantled the rest methodically. For the new house site, Grant selected a spot with a view of both the mountains and the fields, positioned to catch the morning sun but shaded in the hottest part of the afternoon. Together, they marked the foundation, a simple rectangle that would contain 2 bedrooms, a larger main room combining kitchen and living areas, and luxury of luxuries, a covered porch. Nothing fancy, Grant explained as they reviewed his rough sketch, but solid, built to last. Polly found herself oddly emotional looking at the simple drawing. It's perfect. Grant enlisted the help of 2 men from town for the heaviest work, felling trees from Polly's north woodlot and dragging them to the house site. He paid them fairly but worked twice as hard himself, determined that most of the construction should be his own hands' work. Polly contributed in ways her condition allowed, stripping bark from logs, mixing mud for chinking, preparing meals for the workers, and keeping meticulous track of supplies and progress in a ledger Thomas had once used for farm accounts. She refused to be a spectator, even when Grant gently suggested she rest. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," became her refrain whenever he expressed concern about her exertions. As summer faded into early autumn, the house took shape with remarkable speed. The foundation stones were laid, the log walls rose, the roof beams were set in place. Grant worked from sunrise to sunset, stopping only when the light grew too dim to see clearly. Polly found herself watching him, often the competent movements of his hands as he notched logs to fit perfectly together, the concentration in his expression as he measured and cut, the easy way he directed the other men without seeming to give orders. He built with a care she'd never witnessed before, as though each nail driven, each joint fitted was a personal promise. The townsfolk began to talk, of course. Several times, Polly overheard whispers when she went to the general store for supplies. Some speculated that Grant was a relative come to help his poor widowed cousin. Others, less charitable, suggested arrangements of a more scandalous nature. A few wondered if he might be working toward claiming the land once the baby came, taking advantage of a vulnerable woman. "Let them talk," Grant said when Polly mentioned the gossip one evening. They were sitting on the half-finished porch, watching the sunset paint the new roof beams with golden light. "People will always find something to fill their idle hours. What matters is the truth between us." "And what is that truth, Grant?" Polly asked quietly, studying his profile. He turned to face her, his expression open and unguarded. "That I'm building this house for you and your child because you deserve a safe place to call home. No ulterior motives, no expectations." Polly wanted to believe him. More than that, she realized with a start she wanted there to be more to it. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. "I've been thinking about names," she said instead, changing the subject. "For the baby." Grant smiled, accepting the shift in conversation gracefully. "Any favorites so far? Margaret for a girl after my grandmother for a boy." She hesitated. "I had thought Thomas after his father, but now I'm not so sure." "Thomas is a fine name," Grant assured her. "A way to keep his memory alive." "Yes, but—" Polly's hand moved to her belly, feeling the now familiar movements beneath. "I'm starting to think this child deserves his own identity. A fresh start, not a memorial." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "What about William? It was my grandfather's name." "Means resolute protector seems fitting for a child born to such a determined mother." "William," Polly repeated, testing the name. "I like it." As October arrived, bringing crisp mornings and the first hints of color to the aspen trees, the house neared completion. The roof was shingled, the windows installed, the door hung on sturdy iron hinges. Inside, Grant had crafted simple furniture, a table with benches, a rocking chair positioned to catch the warmth from the stone fireplace, a bed frame in the larger bedroom, and a smaller one in the room designated for the baby. Polly's pregnancy had progressed to its final stages. Her back ached constantly, her ankles swelled, and the baby seemed determined to press against every internal organ simultaneously. Still, she insisted on helping with the finishing touches, hanging the curtains she'd sewn from feed sacks, arranging her few possessions on shelves Grant had built into the walls, laying braided rugs she'd made during evening rest periods over the packed earth floor. "Tomorrow we can move you in," Grant announced one evening as they stood in the center of the main room, surveying their work. "Just need to build up the first fire to drive out any dampness, make sure the chimney draws properly, and it'll be ready." Polly turned slowly, taking in the space that had been just a dream weeks before. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. Grant was immediately concerned. "What's wrong? Is it not what you wanted?" She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. Then, "It's more than I dared hope for, I never thought." She gestured helplessly, encompassing not just the house but everything that had happened since his arrival. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." Grant stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently wipe away a tear from her cheek. "Seeing you and your child safe and warm this winter will be thanks enough." His touch, light as it was, sent warmth spreading through Polly's body. She found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might close the remaining distance between them. Instead, he dropped his hand and stepped back. "I should check that chimney one more time before dark." Polly watched him go, her emotions in turmoil. She had not expected to feel anything for another man so soon after losing Thomas. Had not thought her heart capable of it. Yet there it was, an unmistakable yearning for Grant Patterson that went beyond gratitude for his help or appreciation of his kindness. But what did he feel? He had never spoken of staying beyond completing the house, never hinted at wanting anything more than to ensure her welfare before continuing on his way. Perhaps his kindness was exactly what he claimed, a good deed with no expectations attached. The thought left her feeling hollow. The next day dawned bright and clear. Polly woke early, excitement and nervousness battling within her at the prospect of moving into the new house. She packed her few belongings carefully, wrapping her mother's china plates in clean cloth and securing Thomas's books with twine. Grant appeared at the cabin door just as she finished, leading his horse, which was already saddled for travel. Polly's heart sank at the sight. "You're leaving," she stated flatly, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Just going to town for supplies," he corrected, seeming not to notice her reaction. "Thought we should stock up before moving day. Flour, coffee, sugar. Anything else you need." Relief washed over her so powerfully that she had to sit down. Grant was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right? Is it the baby?" "I'm fine," she assured him, embarrassed by her overreaction. "Just a dizzy spell. It happens lately." Grant frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Maybe we should wait another day before moving." "Absolutely not," Polly insisted, standing again carefully. "I'm perfectly capable of—" Her sentence was cut short by a sharp pain that made her gasp and clutch her belly. Grant's expression changed from concern to alarm. "That wasn't a dizzy spell." "No," Polly admitted, breathing deeply as the pain subsided. "But it's probably just false labor. The midwife said that happens sometimes in the final weeks." "When was your last visit with the midwife?" Grant asked, guiding her back to the chair. 6 weeks ago, maybe." "She doesn't come out this far very often." Another pain gripped her, stronger than the first. "Oh," Grant's face set in a determined expression. "I'm fetching Mrs. Holloway now. No arguments." He was gone before Polly could protest, the sound of his horse's hooves fading rapidly as he raced toward town. Left alone, Polly tried to time the pains as the midwife had instructed her. They seemed too irregular to be true labor, but they were getting stronger. By the time Grant returned with Mrs. Holloway, a stern-faced woman with capable hands and over 30 years of bringing babies into the world, Polly was pacing the small cabin, one hand pressed to her lower back. "Well, Mrs. Bennett, let's have a look at you," the midwife said briskly, shooing Grant outside with a flick of her wrist. After a brief examination, Mrs. Holloway's verdict was clear. "This baby's not waiting any longer, dear. You're already well along." Polly shook her head in disbelief. "But it's too early. The pains just started this morning. Some women don't feel the early stages, especially with first babies," the midwife explained, already unpacking her supplies. "Now, would you prefer to stay here or move to that new house I passed on the way in?" "The new house," Polly said without hesitation. "I want my child born there." Mrs. Holloway seemed doubtful but acquiesced after assessing how far apart Polly's contractions were. "If we hurry, we might make it, but if things progress too quickly, we stop wherever we are." "Understood." Grant helped Polly into the wagon he'd borrowed from a neighbor for moving day, making a seat as comfortable as possible with blankets and hay. Mrs. Holloway sat beside her, keeping a practiced eye on her condition during the short but bumpy journey to the new house. They arrived just as another powerful contraction gripped Polly, this one leaving her breathless and unable to move for several moments. Grant lifted her from the wagon as though she weighed nothing, carrying her carefully up the steps and through the front door of the house he had built with his own hands. "Where?" he asked simply. "Bedroom," Mrs. Holloway directed. "And then water lots of it, heated if possible." Grant settled Polly on the new bed, his eyes meeting hers briefly. She saw worry there, but also something else, a fierce protectiveness that made her feel safe despite the pain and fear. "You'll be fine," he told her softly. "You're the strongest person I know, Polly Bennett." Then he was gone, following the midwife's orders while Mrs. Holloway prepared for the delivery. The next hours passed in a blur of pain for Polly. The contractions came harder and closer together, each one seeming to tear her apart from the inside. Mrs. Holloway's calm instructions anchored her, giving her something to focus on beyond the pain. Outside the bedroom door, Grant paced. Each cry from Polly felt like a physical blow, knowing she was suffering and he could do nothing to ease it. He prayed for the first time since the war, disjointed, desperate prayers for Polly's safety and the child's. As twilight fell, Polly's ordeal reached its peak. "Push now, dear," Mrs. Holloway urged. "Your baby's almost here." With a final, tremendous effort that drew a scream from her parched throat, Polly felt the pressure release. A moment of terrifying silence followed, then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a strong, indignant cry as her child took its first breath. "A boy," Mrs. Holloway announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Polly's face as the midwife placed the tiny bundle in her arms. He had a shock of dark hair, a red, scrunched face, and the tiniest fingers she had ever seen. "William," she whispered, remembering the name Grant had suggested. "William Thomas Bennett. Shall I tell the father he can come in now?" Mrs. Holloway asked, misunderstanding the situation entirely. Too exhausted to correct her, Polly simply nodded. Moments later, Grant entered hesitantly, his expression transforming from worry to wonder as he saw mother and child. "He's perfect," Grant breathed, standing at the bedside, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking from the blanket. "William Thomas," Polly told him, watching his reaction. "If that's still all right." Grant's smile was answer enough. "Hello, William Thomas," he said softly. "Welcome to your home." Mrs. Holloway busied herself with the final tasks of delivery, tactfully giving them a moment of privacy. When she finished, she gave Polly instructions for rest and recovery, promised to return the next day, and departed with a knowing look between the new mother and the man who had built her a house. Left alone with Grant and her newborn son, Polly felt a curious sense of peace despite her exhaustion. "So," she said quietly, "the house is finished and the baby has arrived. What happens now?" Grant pulled the rocking chair closer to the bed and sat down, his expression thoughtful. "Now you rest and recover. Get to know this little one. Settle into your home. And you?" Polly asked, the question she'd been avoiding finally spoken aloud. Grant was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from the baby to Polly's face. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" "On whether there's a place for me here. Not just as a builder or a hired hand, but—" He hesitated, seeming to struggle for words. "Polly, I never expected to find something worth staying for when I rode into your fields that day. I'd been drifting so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking to replace Thomas. I know your heart still holds him, but if there's room in it for me too someday, I'd like to stay. Help you raise William, build a life here together." Polly's heart raced at his words. She looked down at her son, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at the man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. "Thomas will always be part of me," she said softly. "He gave me William, and I'll make sure his son knows about him, but my heart isn't as limited as I thought." She reached out her free hand, which Grant took gently in his own. "There's plenty of room for you, Grant Patterson. If you're sure this is what you want, a widow with a newborn, a farm that needs endless work, a future that's far from certain." "That's exactly what I want," Grant interrupted, his voice firm. "You, William, this house, this land, the chance to build something lasting." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I've wandered enough, Polly. I'm home now if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she whispered, tears blurring her vision again, tears of exhaustion and pain, yes, but also of a joy she had not dared to hope for. "We'll have you." Grant's smile held all the promise of tomorrow as he moved from the chair to perch carefully on the edge of the bed. With infinite gentleness, he placed one hand on William's blanket-wrapped form and the other against Polly's cheek. "May I?" he asked, his meaning clear. Polly nodded, and Grant leaned forward to press his lips to hers in a kiss that spoke of beginnings rather than endings, of possibilities rather than losses. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the quiet room. "Welcome home," Polly murmured, and felt rather than saw his smile. Winter came early that year, blanketing the farm in snow before November's end. But inside the solid log house with its sturdy roof and warm hearth, Polly, Grant, and baby William were snug and safe. The months of cold and darkness that had once filled Polly with dread now became a time of quiet joy as their small family established its rhythms. Grant proved to be a natural father, holding William with confidence, singing him to sleep with old cavalry songs modified to be suitable for infant ears, walking the floor with him through colicky nights so Polly could rest. His tenderness with the baby revealed a side of him Polly hadn't fully seen before, and it only deepened her growing feelings for him. Their relationship progressed slowly, respectfully. Grant continued to sleep in the second bedroom, though they often stayed up late talking by the fire after William was asleep, learning each other's stories, dreams, and fears. The physical distance between them felt like a necessary acknowledgement of Polly's recent widowhood and the newness of their feelings, but the emotional connection grew stronger each day. In late January, as a blizzard howled outside, Grant asked Polly about her family back east. She had mentioned them only in passing before. "There's not much to tell," she said, gazing into the fire. "My parents were wealthy, respectable Philadelphians who expected me to marry within our social circle. When I fell in love with Thomas, a farmer's son with ambitions to go west, they gave me an ultimatum. I chose Thomas." She shrugged, the old pain dulled by time. "They disowned me. I haven't heard from them since our wedding day." Grant's expression darkened. "They're fools, then, to throw away a daughter like you over pride and social standing." "What about your family?" Polly asked, curious about this part of his past he rarely mentioned. Grant was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Lost my mother to fever when I was 12. Pa raised me and my brother alone. He was a good man, hardworking, honest, taught us both the carpentry trade." His voice grew softer. "He died while I was away at war. My brother James wrote to tell me, but by the time the letter reached me, I was deep in Tennessee with General Thomas." "And your brother?" Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "James didn't support the Union cause. We disagreed. Hadn't spoken in years when I got word he'd been killed at Fredericksburg, fighting for the other side." Polly reached across the space between their chairs, taking his hand. "I'm sorry, Grant." He squeezed her fingers gently. "It was a war that turned brother against brother all across the country. We weren't unique." He stared into the fire. "But it's why I drifted after, nothing to go home to, no one waiting." "You have someone waiting now," Polly said softly. "Two someones, actually." Grant's eyes, when they met hers, held such emotion that Polly felt her breath catch. "I thank God for that every day," he told her, his voice rough with feeling, "for leading me to your fields that morning." As winter slowly released its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared, Polly and Grant began making plans for the farm's future. With William growing rapidly, already showing signs of his mother's determination, and his stepfather-to-be's calm temperament, they discussed expanding their crops, adding livestock beyond the few chickens, and the milk cow Grant had purchased in town. "We could try alfalfa in the south field," Grant suggested one evening as they reviewed the farm ledger. "Good feed for livestock, puts nitrogen back in the soil." "And maybe a few sheep," Polly added. "For wool, at least at first, eventually for meat as well." They worked well together, their different experiences complementing each other. Polly's practical knowledge of daily farm operations combined with Grant's broader agricultural understanding, picked up during his travels, created a solid foundation for their plans. On a mild day in early April, Grant took William outside for the first time, bundled warmly against the lingering chill. Polly watched from the doorway as Grant carried the baby around the farmyard, pointing out chickens, clouds, and budding trees, as though the 4-month-old could understand every word. "And this," she heard him say as they approached the fenced garden plot he'd prepared, "is where your mama is going to grow the best vegetables in the territory. And maybe some flowers, too, because beautiful things are important, son, not just useful ones." Love swelled in Polly's heart, so intense it almost hurt. When Grant turned and saw her watching, the smile he gave her was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm, bright, full of promise. That night, after William was sleeping soundly, Polly joined Grant on the porch where he sat watching the stars emerge. Without speaking, she settled beside him on the bench he'd built, closer than usual, her side pressed against his. "Polly," he questioned softly. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "I don't want to wait any more, Grant." His brow furrowed slightly. "Wait for what? For us," she said simply. "For whatever comes next. I've been holding back, telling myself it's too soon, that I need more time. But the truth is, I'm already yours in every way that matters. I love you, Grant Patterson. I love the father you are to William, the partner you are to me, the man you are in yourself." Grant's expression transformed, joy and longing breaking through his usual restraint. "Polly," he breathed, raising a hand to touch her cheek with reverent fingers. "Are you sure?" "More sure than I've ever been of anything," she affirmed. "If you still want us, then I'm ready. No more separate bedrooms, no more waiting for some arbitrary appropriate amount of time to pass." "I want you," Grant said, his voice deepening with emotion. "God knows I've wanted you since I first saw you stubbornly pulling weeds in that field, but I need you to be certain. I need to know you won't regret this." In answer, Polly leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their first kiss, gentle and tentative in the aftermath of William's birth, this one held nothing back. She poured all her feelings into it, her gratitude, her admiration, her desire, and most of all, her love. Grant responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her, drawing her closer as though he could erase all space between them. When they finally separated, both breathless, his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "Marry me," he said, not a question but a plea. "Be my wife, Polly. Let me be William's father in truth as well as deed." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in Virginia City's small church. The ceremony was simple, attended only by a few neighbors who had become friends over the winter months, and Mrs. Holloway, who held William throughout the service. The baby, now approaching 5 months old, behaved perfectly until the final prayer, when he let out a crow of delight that made the entire congregation laugh. "Even the little one gives his blessing," the minister commented with a smile as he pronounced them husband and wife. Their wedding night was a revelation. Grant's tenderness, his patience as they discovered each other, created an intimacy Polly had never known. In his arms, she found not just pleasure but a profound sense of rightness, as though their bodies had been crafted specifically to fit together. "I love you," he whispered against her skin in the darkness. "My Polly, my heart." "And I love you," she responded, her fingers tracing the contours of his face as if to memorize him by touch. "My Grant, my home." Spring blossomed into summer, and the small farm flourished under their joint care. Grant's building skills and Polly's gardening expertise transformed the property. New fences, a proper barn to replace the one lost in the storm, expanded fields of corn and wheat, the alfalfa they'd discussed, a kitchen garden bursting with vegetables, and, as Grant had promised, flowers, sunflowers, and zinnias that turned their faces to the Montana sun. William thrived, growing from an infant to a determined crawler seemingly overnight. His first tooth appeared, followed quickly by several more. His dark hair, so like Thomas's, curled at the nape of his neck, but his eyes had lightened to match his mother's. He showed no shyness with strangers but always reached for Grant or Polly when uncertain, secure in his parents' love. In late summer, as they harvested the first of the season's corn, Polly realized she'd been feeling unusually tired, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. The symptoms were familiar enough that she knew what they meant before she even consulted Mrs. Holloway. She told Grant on a warm August evening as they sat on their porch, William already asleep inside. The sky was painted in spectacular shades of pink and gold, a fitting backdrop for her news. "I'm carrying your child," she said, watching his face closely. "Due in early spring, Mrs. Holloway thinks." Grant stared at her for a heartbeat, then let out a whoop that probably startled every creature within a mile. He lifted her from the bench, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet, mindful of her condition. "A baby," he marveled, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy, Polly asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Grant assured her, his eyes suspiciously bright. I never imagined I'd have this: a wife, a son, another child on the way, land that responds to our care, a home we built together. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. Polly leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Sometimes I think about that day you rode up while I was working in the field, how close you came to just passing by, how different everything would be if you hadn't stopped. I couldn't have ridden past if I'd tried, Grant admitted. Something about you caught me and wouldn't let go. Your determination, maybe, or your courage. All I know is I was meant to find you, Polly Patterson. The sound of her married name still gave Polly a small thrill. She had kept Bennett as William's surname, a connection to the father he would never know, but had gladly taken Patterson as her own when they wed. And I was meant to be found, she replied, raising her face for his kiss. By you, only you. Winter came again, but this time Polly faced it with joy rather than dread. The house Grant had built stood strong against the Montana cold, its walls thick, its roof secure, its hearth warming the growing family within. William took his first steps just before Christmas, toddling unsteadily between his parents with a look of fierce concentration that made them both laugh with delight. As Polly's pregnancy progressed, Grant took on more of the household chores, insisting she rest whenever possible. He had expanded their home during the fall, adding a third bedroom and enlarging the main living area to accommodate their growing family. His care for her was constant but never smothering, respecting her strength while honoring her need for occasional support. On a snowy March morning in 1874, Polly gave birth to their daughter, Emma Grace Patterson. The labor was shorter than William's had been, though no less intense. Grant stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when the pain seemed unbearable. When the midwife placed the squalling infant on Polly's chest, Grant's face reflected the same wonder he'd shown at William's birth. She's beautiful, he breathed, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers, just like her mother. William, not quite 18 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister. Baby, he would say, pointing at her crib. Emma. The family settled into new rhythms as spring returned to the land. Grant taught William to help with simple chores, making games of feeding chickens and collecting eggs. Polly tended Emma while maintaining her kitchen garden, often working with the baby secured against her in a sling. As Emma's first birthday approached, Grant surprised Polly with news. I had a letter from town today, he told her one evening after the children were asleep. The railroad's coming through about 5 miles south. They're establishing a new stop there. Polly considered the implications. That could be good for us. Easier to ship crops, get supplies. There's more, Grant continued, a hint of excitement in his voice. They're looking for someone to establish a lumberyard and carpentry shop near the new station. The railroad agent remembered the work I did on the Johnston place last year. They've offered you the position, Polly guessed, reading his expression. Grant nodded. It would mean regular income beyond what the farm provides, security for the children's future. But, he added quickly, it would also mean dividing my time between here and there. I won't take it if you think it would be too much. Polly thought about how far they had come from those desperate days when she'd been alone, pregnant, and terrified of the future. The farm was productive now, their home comfortable and secure. William was growing into a sturdy, confident little boy, and Emma showed signs of the same determination that had helped her parents survive hardship. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, she decided. We could hire help for the farm during busy seasons. And perhaps, when the children are a bit older, I could join you occasionally. I've always wanted to learn more about carpentry. Grant's smile was answer enough. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that promised more once they retired to their bedroom. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The railroad transformed the region, bringing new settlers, businesses, and opportunities. Grant's carpentry shop flourished, his reputation for quality work spreading throughout the territory. The farm expanded under Polly's capable management, with hired hands helping during planting and harvest seasons. William grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Emma developed her father's skill with tools and her mother's gift for nurturing growing things. Two more children joined the family, Robert in 1877 and Sarah in 1880, completing their household. In 1890, on the anniversary of the day Grant had first ridden onto Polly's land, they stood together on the porch of the house he had built before William's birth. That original structure was now the heart of a larger home, expanded over the years as their family grew. The farm had prospered, its boundaries extended through careful purchases of neighboring land. 18 years, Grant marveled, his arm around Polly's waist. His hair was threaded with silver now, but his eyes were as clear and kind as the day they'd met. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I found you working in that field. Polly leaned into him, content in the solid strength that had never failed her. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you all my life. You ever regret it? Grant asked, a question he posed on this day each year. Letting me stay, building a life with me. Polly turned in his arms to face him, taking in the beloved features time had only made dearer to her. Not for a single moment, she answered truthfully. You came when I needed you most and built me a house before my baby came. But more than that, you helped me build a home, a family, a future. What could I possibly regret about that? Grant's kiss was as tender as their first, filled with the depth of feeling that had grown through joy and sorrow, work and rest, the raising of children and the building of dreams. I love you, Polly Patterson, he murmured against her lips. Today, tomorrow, always. And I love you, she responded, the words as fresh and true as the first time she'd spoken them. My cowboy, my builder, my heart. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, the home Grant had created with his own hands. Before them stretched fields of grain ripening in the summer sun, the legacy they would leave their children. And between them flowed the love that had begun with an act of kindness when a pregnant woman working in the fields had found an unexpected champion in a passing cowboy with the skills and heart to build not just a house, but a future.